positive experience in that sense. Obviously, sleep, you're coping, you're eating rations, so there's all the challenges start to come in where you're starting to have to deal with a bit of adversity, a bit of challenges start to slowly take the toll on the body and such. But we felt good, and then obviously it was quite early in the tour when I got injured, so I skived off quite a lot of the tour and left the lads to it, sadly.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation. Today's episode is a little bit different. My special guest is a good friend, someone I served with in the Queen's Lancashire Regiment. Not been in touch for a while, but very lucky that he's able to come on to the episode today and share a little bit of his life experience. Rick Clement, he is a military veteran. He was seriously injured in Afghanistan. So today's conversation, it's really deep at the purpose of this podcast. And his story, hopefully, will resonate with many of you out there listening today. It's not just about the injury after the service. It's not just about medals or even after the structure is all gone. Rick, it's good to have you on today. And for the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me, mate. My name's Rick. I served originally with the Queen's Lancashire Regiment, and then as we amalgamated into what is now the Duke of Lancaster Regiment, joined back in '96 originally, but I went into the Remit for a very short time, did basic training, went off to do my trade training as a vehicle mechanic, decided, no, that's not for me, and transferred over to the infantry dead early. From Clitheroe originally, small town in Lancashire, sort of in the middle of Blackburn, Burnley area, and I live over near Blackpool now in a town called Fleetwood.
Awesome, mate. So how are you doing today? I asked that question in seriousness, but also in a little bit of jest, in the sense of your favourite team, Man United, played Villa on Sunday. And how do you feel after that experience?
Yeah, I'm generally feeling pretty good, mate. I've managed to evolve into getting used to rubbish results for Man United these days, so I don't take it as hard as I would have in my youth, I think. But yeah, in general, everything's pretty good. I've just been checking in on my mum. She tripped over a slipper. She's good at stuff like that. Fell on the coffee table and she's a bit battered and bruised, but nothing serious. So other than that, everything's pretty rosy.
So I wish your mum all the best and a speedy recovery. I just want you to think back, if you don't mind, right? So if you look about your early years, what was the reason you joined in the first place? What was the driving force? Did you have any role models? Was it something of the job that interested you?
It was really random, actually. Sort of at that age, aren't you, 15, 16, getting ready to leave school, looking at what the rest of your life's going to look. Everybody's firing questions at you as if you should know by then what your life's going to look like and your job and everything. I didn't really know. The only thing I really knew was that I didn't want to go to college or anything. I got decent GCSEs, but I'd had enough of education. I wanted to sort of get out, see the world a bit, and do a bit more. So I started looking at what those options were. There was like a computer program at school where you pump a couple of interests into it and it pops out a list of suitable jobs. Whatever I put in there popped out sort of Army, Navy, Air Force, like top 3. And that was really the first seed, I suppose. So I discussed it with my parents, who were adamant they would like me to get a trade if that's what I went, which led me towards the Remit. And my dad was a bit of a mechanic in his spare time. My real dad was an auto electrician, so I had those links to vehicles, and I've always loved cars anyway, a bit of a petrol head. And that's what kind of sent me down that path, off to the careers office, sold loads of lies like they do, that it's like Butlins holiday camp and all that good stuff. But yeah, I never really looked back from that point.
Awesome, mate. So, you look back at your childhood and then you join the army. I often have these conversations with people who ask me, what's it like in the army? And the first thing I always think back to is basic training, of life-changing moments. The schoolboy gets stripped apart and then becomes a man overnight. So what's your memories of basic training?
Yeah, it's something you'll never forget, isn't it? Basic training. All of a sudden, you're whisked away from everything you know, your parents, your family, and you've got an amount of time where you can't sort of see them and very few phone calls and stuff. So that in itself is difficult. But then you've got all these new people to meet, new mates, and I think you don't realise it at the time, but the section commanders, your platoon sergeant and that, almost kind of make themselves the enemy, so that you bond over that kind of dislike of being beasted and things like that. And you think back now and you think, well, what a clever way of doing it. But at the time you obviously thought, oh, these guys are always on my case, they're a nightmare. And But the adjustment was huge. By the end of my basic training, I won best recruit. But what I didn't know is when I first got there, the platoon sergeant told me he expected me to last about 5 minutes. I was clearly a bit of a nightmare when I first got in. So it shows you how much you kind of change. I think I obviously needed some time to just find my feet and then push on. But of course, it's difficult, and you're doing fitness every day. You're getting fragged, and you're doing this, and like I remember just probably the best sleeps in my life, because every night you were knackered and working from the second you got up early to 10 o'clock at night, so in your locker, and then sleeping on the floor so you didn't have to mess your bed block up and stuff like that. But I do remember it fondly. I do remember that it was hard work, but yeah, just there was good lads in my section and platoon and stuff, and we had good crack. But yeah, it was definitely a hard adjustment. But I think for me, it's what I probably needed: a bit of confidence building, show me what independence looks like, and standing on my own 2 feet without my parents and things.
I totally agree. You look back, it's probably the hardest time because you're getting stripped away from what you believe you are to the man that you needed to become. You went through a different phase because you went to Remy first. Did you find going to the Remy then to our regiment, was that a difficult transition for you, or was it a smooth sailing because you had that purpose behind you?
It was fairly smooth, just because of the fact I did basic training as anyone would do, just not in the same place as the infantry at that time. Then went to do boarding, where you would have done the vehicle mechanic, but there was something like, I think it was like a 12-month waiting list to start your mechanic training, and that's where I think I started to get bored and think, actually, I'd rather just crack on. Looked into my options and transferred. So I then went from there to phase 2 up at Catterick, did that, and then to the regiment. So it was almost like I did an extra long period of training. It's probably like 18 months of training in the end. That probably stood me in good steadfast in terms of I had extra time compared to other people. And it was interesting doing phase 2 because I had my cap badge and stuff at that time, Remy, and I passed out. So I was getting treated like, oh, you should be a trained soldier, you should be doing this better, and you should be doing that. And I found that quite hard at the time because you were expected to be better, even though I wasn't that much more trained than the others, to be honest. But I did okay there as well, and I obviously passed out. I was in a Scottish platoon, so that was hard work. They were always on your case. But yeah, again, another challenging but good period, and then off to the regiment, who had not long got to Homer, so that was a nice, well, not a nice place to go, but I actually enjoyed being over there and the patrols and the Northern Ireland aspect of it.
I agree. I think leaving basic training, having something as high intensity and hard work in relation to going on tour, I think, especially in our case in Northern Ireland, back then it wasn't often on the news, so no one really knew what Northern Ireland was like. But it was hard work preparing to go, the time away, and then when you come back, it was a long journey. And obviously, I think basic training helped prepare you for that difficult time because you've gone from one real high intense environment and then back into the other. Do you feel that basic training prepared you mentally? Did it make you more mentally robust, resilient, or was you already prepared for the hard graft?
I think it definitely helped. I think it taught me in terms of when you think you are physically tired and in pain, what we I always call it the good type of pain, where your body's just telling you that you're working hard, as opposed to the other type of pain where it's telling you to stop. And you realise you can drive through that, and you can do so much more than what your body's sort of telling you. Things like that. And I think that ended up holding me in good stead for eventually when I got injured and stuff. I think we have this idea of how far we can push ourselves, and it's nowhere near as far as actually what you can go, how you can survive on little to no sleep, not a lot of food. It's crazy, isn't it? But without the army, I would have never known any of that stuff, really. And basic training was fundamental to that.
And I totally agree with that because my journey is very similar. I came from a really typical Northern upbringing, working class background, and I never had any fear of joining the army. But it was the first time really I'd been away from home. That discipline brought up as a child. But what helped also, the training made me harder as a person. I joined my regiment, preparing for Northern Ireland, and being around some of the well-known personalities in the regiment helped you to stay grounded. You never felt that you was bigger or better than what you really were. Can you remember what personalities really helped you in your time when you first joined the regiment?
Yeah, there were loads. I was lucky to kind of fall into a really good group of people. There were the likes of Andy Mayu giving you what not to do, and then you had your Redders, Rick Ifolds, Paddy Wards, people like that, and they massively helped because they give you kind of they grip you when you needed to be gripped, and I know there's a lot of talk about the military and bullying culture, and like, don't get me wrong, there's definitely some that goes on. Thankfully for me, that never happened, and I never felt that when I was gripped. I deserved to be gripped, um, and like you mentioned, I'd had a good disciplined upbringing where I sort of knew quite well to toe the line and do what I needed to do. Stay out of people's minds in terms of the people who were looking for the nightmares and the people always in trouble. Were enough for them to kind of I could go under the radar a bit. But yeah, without those people, because you're coming into this new environment and it's a tough environment and potentially dangerous, in Northern Ireland and stuff. So you need that. You can't just be doing what you think or whatever you want. And if you don't get grip, that's what's going to happen, isn't it? And I never had a problem with that. Um, it definitely does. Discipline, determination, resilience all comes from that sort of environment. I think you've got whatever levels you have as a human being in general, but the military certainly puts some layers on that. And also, like, you see what the other people are doing. If they mess up and stuff and you get gripped, that puts you off as well, innit? Because it's not happening to you, but you don't want it to happen to you next time. So there's things like that. There were characters, head or chest, you get one of them and nobody wants to dig. So yeah, it's, a lot of people would call some of that bullying, but like for me, it never felt that way. I was from the background of, like, you get a clip round here when you're naughty, and like, my parents were amazing. I was never abused in any way, shape or form, but when I was naughty, I got what I deserved, and that's how I felt the army was like. I know that, like, as I said, I know there was other people who had different experiences, and I feel for them in that respect, because it would be a very difficult, challenging thing if you had people overly on your case. Thankfully for me, that never happened. Those good characters, Rick Ifolds and Al Connors and stuff, were kind of notorious for filling people in if they gobbed off to them anyway. So if you hung around with them, you got left alone.
Oh, definitely. I think there's a bullying that went on in the military. Regardless of what background or life you've lived, it's not a way of being treated. And thankfully, you said you wasn't part of that or experienced that, which I'm really pleased to hear. I just think for those who may be listening to this and felt like that their life had been impacted by that kind of behaviour, I hope they do seek the help that they need to overcome those challenges of reliving those times. The military's hard enough as it is. Go through basic training, the courses that you go on, and on the operational tours. People think it's really glorified, but it's the 6 month beat up, the time away from family and friends, and then the return back of you recovering from what you've been a part of. So if you look back at your time, those personalities that you work with, what would you say describe Rick as during your time and before you went to Afghanistan?
I always thought I was probably a quieter person than some of the big personalities. Maybe middle of the road, because I was never quiet and shied away. I was always kind of involved in, the parties and the good times, and I felt I spoke and I got my message across in the groups that I was socialising and stuff. But I'm not a shouter or a screamer. I never have been, and there was plenty of them in the army, and you just kind of let them do their thing and sit in the background quietly. I think I was just, at first you're trying to find your feet, so you stay out of trouble, you stay quiet, and then as you pick up your lance corporal and corporal, your voice is more heard then, and maybe I became a little bit more vocal in terms of getting my point across and things. But I've always just felt like a fairly quiet, confident sort of guy. It's funny we're talking about bullying. I experienced that at school, so I had that sort of view on it, which is why I never felt it in the army. Like, having known what it felt like before, thankfully I never had that again. But I think that taught me to deal with things, and I built up a bit of resilience as a young person from that as well, which probably helped me in the military. And there's also that fine balance of you've got to kind of be an alpha male all the time in the army, haven't you? Because there's just so many blokes, and everybody's trying to find where they are in the pecking order as such, and not become the person that's being bullied, things like that. So it's interesting trying to find your level, and I felt like I managed to find my level, went back down when I needed to, but I was also not going out looking for it either. And that was an interesting dynamic of the military I always found. It was a constant balancing act of, a new lad would come in and start giving it to you, and you'd have to kind of just make sure you put him down a peg or two, and in the right way, in the right way, to, and make sure that he knew that wasn't acceptable, and that was part of your responsibility, particularly as a lance corporal or corporal. But at the same time, you also you're living on top of each other, so you don't want to be falling out with each other and kicking off all the time, and you're dealing with these high pressure environments, like you said, so you're trying to let off some steam as well. And the beer culture was obviously big when we were joined, and from what I believe, it's less so now, I think, which is probably a good thing. As much as I think we let off steam with beer, ultimately that generally leads to a bit of scrapping and a bit of that, which isn't the healthy way to deal with things. But that was kind of all the only way we knew. So there was that part as well. But I was never a scrapper at all. If I could avoid a fight, then absolutely I would. But there were times where you just had to kind of stand your ground as well. And I think these are the things like people don't see about on camp, where you can't back down, because then you would become that bully. If they see weakness, kind of have to puff that chest out and just push forward sometimes when you really don't want to.
No, I agree. There's often, especially during our time, you weren't allowed to be vulnerable, especially weren't allowed to express those vulnerabilities. Now, I think generationally, people are becoming more aware of their emotional positions. And I think it's important that people get the ability to express themselves and speak, especially if they're suffering from any form of mental health, be it from work-based situations, any kind of traumatic event that they may have dealt with. To even as little as being unhappy in the job. Those times you need to find a way, and it could be those bonds made with teammates in the military, when that shared conversation could provide a little bit of guidance. And personalities we mentioned earlier on helps you stay grounded, accountable, sometimes with a good soundboard to be able to make the right decisions. You talked a little bit about your childhood and your parents always provided the advice if you needed it. If you look back now through your training and then joining a regiment, do you recognise the Rick before, or do you see a massive change to the Rick you became?
No, there's still a lot of me is that person. A huge thing I've got is stubbornness, so I don't change a great deal, and that's helped in the army and in my recovery after injury and stuff. Having that family and friends and good support network has helped. But I'm like, as you said, that you can't be vulnerable in the army, and I see things in me now, like I don't particularly like hugs and stuff from family. I don't like. Some people hang around with their mum a lot and stuff. I go and see my mum. I'm close with my mum, but there's still that voice in my head going, "You can't be seen to be hanging around with your mum," and that's definitely from the military. Yeah, there are just real things that I will never be able to change about myself, because I've been brought up to be. No, you've got to be this tough soldier. You've got to always look right. Can't hang around with your mum. Can't do girly things. It's fancy dress and stuff like that. I mean, I have done it. I mean, I've done it at mess dues, but if someone said to me now, "Do you want to do fancy dress?" I'd immediately be like, "Oh, it's just a bit girly, that, isn't it?" It's and it's not. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just how the mind has been switched, like you said, when they pull apart that kid of you and build you back into what they want. And I think as you get older, you become aware of those things. And I try and be better with my mum, and, take her for a coffee sometimes, even with that voice saying what it does and things like that. But it is interesting. But in general, going back to your original question, I feel like I'm still that same bloke. I've definitely had to change in certain ways, I think, just as anybody does as you get older. I've grown up a lot, maturity's changed me a bit. My injuries have changed me just in terms of how I've had to adapt to that. But I think the one thing that took me a while after injury, but is back again. I feel like when I look in the mirror, it's the same bloke it always was, and I still feel like 21 years old. That my body tells me a bit different, but yeah, I do still feel like that.
I appreciate you sharing that, mate. And I'm glad that you still are reconnected to the person that you were before joining. I mean, you touched on a little bit about your injuries. If you don't mind, I'd like to just talk a little bit about pre-deployment, your time in Afghanistan, and just your recollection really of the incident that left you with the injuries that you have today. So, what was that period like? Going to Afghanistan after many tours, you felt prepared mentally and physically. Also, what was that tour like in the general terms?
Yeah, it's like any tour with lots of pre-deployment training and stuff. And the two things that stood out to me, number one, I picked up my sergeant, like, I don't know, maybe 4 months before we deployed, and then all of a sudden, like, a new platoon was created, 13 platoon, funnily enough, and everybody from all the different companies kind of sent. I believe they sent either the new soldiers or what they would have thought was maybe not their strongest soldiers to this platoon because they had to nominate names. Um, that being said, the reality was it was an absolute cracking bunch of lads that got thrown together, and I think the fact they'd all been pulled from all over made us bond even better because maybe everyone felt a bit like, oh, why have I been sort of pushed out and sent? And everybody had that in common as such. So that was a bit different than normal because generally you would have been with whoever you'd been with for years before in that platoon or whatever. So it was a quick fire kind of get to know the lads, get to know it. I'm still a new sergeant, so I'm trying to figure out what sort of a leader I'm gonna be, how I'm gonna do that and things. So there's a lot going on in that period. But also the second thing was, despite having done pre-deployment for Ireland and Iraq and stuff, I felt it was just another different level up for Afghanistan. Felt to me like we were going to a more serious place. And maybe there was things I'd seen on TV and stuff that were making me think that way as well. Ross Kemp in Afghanistan was an interesting one to watch that obviously showed a bit of the realities of it and stuff like that. There was never anything that I'd seen for Iraq or Northern Ireland really on that, so I probably had more information about the place than ever. But my mentality as the platoon sergeant was I never thought about anything happening to me. I was like, bloody hell, if something happens, it's going to be one of my lads and I'm going to have to deal with it. So I need to make sure I'm on the ball and, you're learning your 9-line and stuff and all that and just making sure everything was spot on for myself with things like that. And at the same time, making sure the lads were carrying the right kit and equipment and training well and that they were prepared the best they could be. So I just felt a bit like dad, making sure that the men were all right and that was it. So I really enjoyed that period. I always wanted to keep progressing in the army and to reach sergeant, first senior rank. Like I was so proud just to be in that position and to be going on an operational tour doing it. It's like the pinnacle, isn't it? That's what we train for. That's what we want to go. So there was never any doubt, never any risk, never any worry for me. It was just full on. Let's get this training done. Let's get this platoon bonded. We were kind of fortunate in a way in the fact that there was those, I think it was Icelandic volcanoes that were going off that caused a lot of the flights. So we were like one of the last lot going out and we got delayed significantly, at least 2 or 3 weeks if I went. So we managed a couple of bonding trips to Alton Towers and things like that in that time. And it was mental. We'd be out on a run in the morning and then, right, the coach is ready, the plane's going to be ready, jump on the coach. So, it's like run back, grab your kit, everything, chuck it all on, and then, oh no, stand down, the plane's not going again. And so it was a bit of a mental couple of weeks that in some respects. But we did obviously eventually got over there, did the training in Bastion and stuff, the pre-training, last minute into updates and all that good stuff. And then I think our first deployment was taking over, I think it was C Company, but I might be wrong on that. They were going out to an operation, so we took over one of their fobs. So that was quite a nice, relaxed way to get into it in terms of we were just essentially on guard duties, not really doing any patrols from there, just getting a feel for the area and things like that. We did go out on one patrol where they showed us the kind of area. Shots were fired, but no major kind of event. So it was a nice way to bed in, and then they came back and we deployed to our own forward operating base, then checkpoint no. And I felt like things were going pretty well. We started pushing out patrols, learning the area, getting into routine of everything, and it felt a lot like Iraq in some senses, the heat and things like that. So I felt good. I felt the boys were ready. Had a good platoon commander, Brad Pino. He was really good to work with, and it was like a positive experience in that sense. Obviously, sleep, you're coping, you're eating rations, so there's all the challenges start to come in where you're starting to have to deal with a bit of adversity, a bit of toughness. You're sleeping in mud huts and things like that, and it's really warm at night. All those sort of challenges start to slowly take the toll on the body and such. But we felt good, and then obviously it was quite early in the tour when I got injured, so I skived off quite a lot of the tour and left the lads to it. Sadly,
I love your sense of humour, and being in the same regiment with a lot of lads from the northwest, that humour was a lot of the reasons why we get through the tough times. Your professionalism to provide, the support for your soldiers is second to none. And I think during that due diligence, during your preparation, is probably part and parcel why your platoon became so solidified, really, and able to do the job. And we're very famous in the infantry. Get off the bus, on the bus, turn up 5 minutes before, 5 minutes before the 5 minutes before you got on the bus to start off with. We go through those cycles of fun and games, but nothing could have prepared you for the the incident. And if you don't mind, talk about what you remember of that period of time. Yes, you got off tour early, but it wasn't as simple as that, was it?
no, it was a day that changed everything. But started off normal. We decided to go and do a patrol quite early in the morning. The boss took one of the multiples out onto a nearby road to check vehicles and do a bit of vehicle checkpoint. So I took out my multiple with as satellite protection, essentially. And we pushed out, and we weren't that far from the base, really, and we came to sort of an area where we had to make a bit of a decision. I think we'd moved, excuse me, we'd moved across an open field, and we hit a point where we had a footpath sort of directly to the front, a building on the right, and an irrigation ditch to the left. And so I had to make the call, which way do we go? The building for me was an absolute no-no because, as you'll know well, they can booby trap floors, doors, windows, you name it. So unless you really need to go in there and drag somebody out or something, it's just not worth the risk. So footpaths were always a potential risk because they could bury IEDs in there. But we'd also add in that they were burying them in the irrigation ditches because we were using those instead of the footpaths. So there was no foolproof, safe method. I made a risk assessment. I felt like at this point we didn't need to go too far along the path, so we were going to use the path. We had the Valens, the metal detectors with the front man. I had confidence that potentially they would do the job and find it if it was there. And that's what we went for. As we were kind of moving along, I was third man back. You had the Valen man at the front, his cover man behind him, and then myself. We were walking along, and I got a shout from behind me, and basically one of the guy's batteries had gone from his ECM, electronic countermeasure kit. So we all went for him, and we gave him a minute or so, just change his battery and sort that out. And then I got the shout, yeah, we're good to go again. And I sort of stood up, and I don't really remember so much of this, but I was told that I sort of took a step backwards, and that triggered off the improvised explosive device. I believe it was a pressure plate from the things I've been told, but it could have been a remote detonated one or anything. We don't know for sure. Either way, it went off. Thankfully, the guy behind me was thrown a bit and got a little bit of a neck injury, but nothing serious. And everybody else was completely unarmed. I took the brunt of it thanks to the spacing and the good drills that we'd used. Fully conscious, believe it or not. I don't know to this day how even initially, I didn't feel any pain or anything. I didn't really know what had happened. I was so disorientated that obviously there'd been a big explosion, a lot of dust thrown up in the air. I couldn't see anything. And it wasn't until the lads started coming towards me to treat me and stuff that I really understood what had happened. It was chaotic. Once my brain understood, that's when the pain kicked in weirdly. And then a nice little funny story. The guy who went to put morphine in me had it upside down and put it into his own hand, into his thumb. Thankfully, we carry spares, and I did get mine pretty quickly after it. But it's interesting. There's a new film called Warfare, and there's an IED in that. And the guy does exactly the same thing with the morphine on that. And I was like watching it thinking this could actually be us. But yeah, the guys came and obviously started treating me medically, as we would always train. Someone steps up into my shoes and someone steps into theirs and so on. And because of the training and the drills that we'd done, it went amazingly because I wouldn't be here without it. I think there was a helicopter with me in about 9 minutes, which just obviously ended up saving my life. The boys patched me up well, took me on a stretcher, and took me to a nearby place where they called in the helicopter back near the fob because we weren't too far away from it. And like just massive credit. And when I spoke obviously earlier about how these guys had been banded together from the misfits of companies and stuff. Some of these were reserve soldiers. The first man who came to me was a reserve soldier. What an amazing job they did, which is testament to them as characters, as people, and also to the training that we put in before, the hard work, the hard lines. I don't think people understand how many times you repeat stuff, and at the time you kind of get a bit fed up of doing the same drills over and over, but this is why I wouldn't be here today without it. The helicopter lands, and on the back of that there's doctors, surgeons and paramedics, far more qualified people who then take over. I believe they banged my head a couple of times against a couple of walls and dropped me out of the stretcher and all sorts, because that's the panic that's going on in that sort of scenario. I can't imagine what it must have been like for them to see me as I was, be processing that, dealing with it, and still manage to keep cool enough to do the job and get me onto that helicopter safe and sound. I was still feeling the pain at this point, still fully conscious. I remember there's a lad called Undy and his distinct voice talking to me. He was kind of reassuring me and chatting away to me. I do remember asking a couple of questions about my legs, so I was obviously aware of them being damaged badly, but definitely not to what extent. It was all madness, I think, from my point of view. I got put on the helicopter, and this is where generally they would knock me out and treat me. As you can imagine, it would be easier to treat somebody who's kind of still and asleep than it would somebody who's still alive and maybe wriggling about and struggling. They put the oxygen mask on me and all that sort of stuff, and I was being a right pain in the bum, ripping it off and refusing. But all I remember thinking was, if I'm awake, I'm all right. You are not putting me to sleep. I'm not having it. And in the end, they had to kind of give up trying to do that. I've since spoken to those medics, one in particular, and it was interesting to have that conversation that I was a nightmare for her, really. But it's actually what kind of made her remember me so much. And yeah, I just kept fighting. They were obviously pumping blood into me now at this stage, because I would have bled out a lot. And trying to stop the bleeding and do the bits they did. And sort of another sort of 9 or 10 minutes later, we're back at Bastion, where the surgeons were ready to do what they needed to do on me, and they were kind of horrified and annoyed that I was still awake, and very quickly then knocked me out. And that I suppose became a period of ease for me. The next couple of weeks, I was stabilised in Bastion, and I came back, flew back to the UK, I think somewhere between 24 and 36 hours later. Apparently I was resuscitated a couple of times on the plane, so that's kind of tiny margins to me not being here or being here. And then I had like this couple of weeks period in a coma where my parents and close friends were by my bedside, not that I was aware. And I can't imagine what that was like for them, because they didn't know if I'd wake up, what I'd wake up like. All that stuff must have been going through their minds. But thankfully, I did wake up, and I'll sort of come on to that period more. I don't know if there's anything you want to ask me before I do.
Hey, everybody. If the story Rick's sharing with us is very powerful, and if it resonates with any of you, please like, share, subscribe on my YouTube channel, James Alder 003, or you can follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon, wherever you find you listen to your podcasts. Rick, it goes without saying, mate, your personality, your professionalism, and more importantly, your will and drive helped to train your soldiers, but helped you to stay strong through those hardest moments. So you look back now about the injuries that you suffered on that day. Can you talk about the injuries and what impact that had on you?
Yeah, so I woke up out of the coma, and I had a period of not really understanding fully what had happened. Obviously, I was on a lot of strong morphine and things like that, so there was a mixture of dreams and reality, which was difficult to kind of pull apart. And to that extent, I was like fighting with my tubes out and refusing to have care, because I genuinely believed, can I go and have a chat with him? And I'm glad he did, because he came in and he sort of asked me a couple of questions about the caliber of ammunition that we used and things like that. And that was to essentially ascertain whether my brain was working and I knew what I was talking about, things like that. And once he'd sort of established that, yes, I knew what, I knew what he was asking me and the answers and stuff, he literally just went, right, I'm giving you an order. This is the situation. You need to let them put the tubes back in. You need to get this recovery sorted and get better. You have lost your legs and so on. And military switch. I just, yeah, sir, no problem. And that was it. Never again from that point onwards did I ever have any issue with any of the tubes in or anything. I knew exactly where I was, what was going on. So it's crazy that I needed that military order to understand everything. But I dread to think if I hadn't got that, what could have happened? Like, I could have gone back into that coma, never woke up. I could have come back again and not, I dread to think. So I feel very fortunate that was a key part for me. Then I've got to understand what all the injuries are, so I'll sort of list them off. There was lots and lots, but the main ones being lost both legs, the left side all the way to the top, hip disarticulation. Right side, I've got a very short stump, so extremely high amputations both sides. My right arm was damaged, the elbow in particular, in the blast, to the point the medic I referred to earlier thought that I was actually a triple amputee, not a double. Luckily, they managed to kind of save it, and I've got limited use of it. Some things it's really strong like normal, but other ways I can't sort of use it in a practical manner, so that's had to be adapted. I had a colostomy bag and a catheter for a while because the damage internally had messed up a lot of things. Thankfully they're both now reversed, so I use the bathroom like anyone else now, but that was difficult for a while. I'm unable to have children. Essentially, my testicles were damaged beyond repair, so that's out the question in terms of having children. And other sort of internal things, hernias. I've no eardrum in my right ear. That the blast took that. I've tried to have it repaired a couple of times, but it's just not repairable. So yeah, physically I was just a mess. I was laid in that hospital bed, couldn't do anything for myself. I felt like I'd gone from this 30-year-old fighting fit soldier to being 90 and requiring constant care. Was not aware of anybody. I didn't have any friends or family members or anybody who was disabled. So I had literally zero knowledge on disability and what people could do. So I was very much like, oh, I'll never be able to swim again, play football, drive. Like, the list was endless. And the reality, that was actually completely wrong. I can do loads of those stuff now, but mentally that was tough because it was all negativity, and I felt like life was just going to be like awful. But thankfully, good family, good friends kept me kind of positive as much as they could. And you slowly kind of started to concentrate on the next bit of surgery, fix that, change that, reverse that. And things like getting rid of the catheter and the colostomy bag were just huge, just because it felt like such a massive step back to where I was before. And then after about 4 months of hospital, I was fit enough to be moved to Headley Court, which is the rehabilitation centre. And that was where, that was the game changer, because you get there and there's people that have been injured by IEDs and stuff, but a couple of years earlier. So you can see at what stage they are in their recovery. They're learning to drive again. They are learning to live independently and cook and clean and all those sorts of things. They are climbing up rock climbing walls, going to the gym, using prosthetic limbs to walk and things like that. So all of a sudden I've got a visual look at my future. And then you're also back in a bit of a military environment, so you start having the banter with the para lads, for example, thinking, well, if he can do that, I'll smash it, I'll do further. So that then pushes you again, and you're having the laughs, taking the mick out of the nurses, saying you can't find your shoes, and running around the room looking for your shoes. Obviously my shoes didn't exist at this point, so there's things like that, that humour again to get through it. And it just, really, really sort of turned me around in terms of positivity and attitude and focus. And I spent about 18 months there, on and off. I got to go home some weekends and things like that. But by the end of that, he's talking about 2 years post-injury then, I was starting to feel back to myself in some extent. There was adjustments in. I remember first going out in my wheelchair, and I just felt like I was in the people's way all the time. In shops, it's often like there's not a lot of room, and it took me some time to adjust to that. To the point where initially I didn't want to go out or in shops. I'd just sit outside the shop and let my family or my missus go in and get whatever I needed or whatever. But slowly but surely, to rebuild that confidence and become sort of Rick 2.0. And I feel definitely the same person, but it took a while to get to that. The physical side of things, now I'm having less operations. I'm more comfortable in the wheelchair. Initially, I had an electric one, but I always wanted to get to a manual one and not rely on a battery and rely on things like that. And yeah, thankfully, very early, I started to get that stubborn streak for independence, and I never had any other intention than doing anything other than living alone again. I didn't want to be living with my parents, and they would have absolutely moved in with me or moved into the house next door or anything that I needed or wanted, but that was sort of never on my agenda. I was always pushing to get back to my independence, and that's how I am today. There's me, my two dogs, live life like everybody else, just a slightly different version where things are adapted. And the good thing is, in the period of life we live in, technology and all those sorts of things, there's so much out there to make life easier, from having your bathroom adapted so that you've got shower seats, things like that, to even cars that have boots that are electrically open and closed, because you can struggle to reach a normal boot on some cars. So to have that button you can press on your key fob to close the boot for you, it all makes life just that little bit easier. And I've always been like a gadget guy anyway, so I've got that interest in things anyway. But it's allowed me to get to where I am today. Now, there were dark times in that hospital where I spent time in my own head thinking I can't, and you've got to learn to push through that, with support, talk about it. There were many times where I sat crying to myself, wondering what life meant, but that was normal. That's how I should have felt at that time, and I've kind of managed to realise that now. Sometimes we get ourselves in holes, and it's difficult to pull out of. But luckily, I was never in a hole for too long. I always had good people, good attitude, and things that helped me push through those difficult times. But some people don't have that. I'm fortunate for that, and I will always be thankful for that too.
Listen, mate, just about saying that's really powerful. Showing that period of time couldn't have been easy. And I think you mentioned earlier on about being stubborn. Sometimes it's a positive trait to have, especially going through some difficult periods of your life. But you talked a little bit there about being emotional and sometimes you're in a dark place. So you're looking back then through that period of the incident with the explosion, the Kazabak back, the realism of what had happened to you and the injuries that you'd occurred. What was the hardest time through all that process? Where did your strength come from? Yeah, we get training to be better soldiers, but there's got to be something internal that helped you to get through those dark times. Could you put a finger on it?
Yeah, the hospital period was definitely the hardest, just because two things really. I had so much time where the visitors weren't in there on my own, and when you're going through anything in life that's difficult and you get a lot of time with your own head, you catastrophize, don't you? And you almost make it worse than what it is in terms of what you're predicting will be. So it was trying not to delve too far into that. My family coming and visiting and helps because it takes your mind off it, and they were just brilliant. And then my mates coming down and having a laugh with me, and yeah, that without that, I'd have struggled, because you had those positive times to look forward to. But it just became. I think for me, I was lucky in the extent that I was physically, so severely physically injured that I became concentrated on the next operation, the next whatever. So slowly, that was my progress and how I measured things. And the mental side got easier for that, because I had a goal. The next goal was, I didn't really have to do anything for it other than turn up for my surgery and be wheeled down. But I knew when I came out, I was another step forward. And I've always been pretty good at focusing on the things that I can control. And I feel for people. There's lots of people out there who over worry about things and really focus on things that they can't control. And that can become really difficult because you've just, as the point is, you've no control over any of that, and there's nothing you can do. Thankfully for me, definitely a trait that I've had. I don't know if that's come from the military or I've always had it. There's obviously probably a little bit of it somewhere always been in there, but I focus on, like, whatever's happened. Like, that's gone. That's in the back part of the brain. Forget that. What's next? What can I do? And that definitely helped me. In the early days, it was just waiting for the next surgery, counting the days to it, getting it done, and then so on. Then it was like, get to Headley Court, right? We're counting down the days till we get there. And then it was counting down the days till I can go home, or whatever that might look like. Trying prosthetic legs. When do I get my new wheelchair? Like, there was always something for me to concentrate on. By the time that 2 years had passed, I was independent. I could drive. Like, it almost passed me by that I'd left the military, to be honest, because I was that busy concentrating on all those things. So I think setting goals is something I would recommend to people, and small achievable ones, and then having those longer term ones that you're striving to get to. That definitely helped me. The stubbornness, as you've said, came in as a real positive, because when people said to me, like, initially, it was like, you'll never walk on prosthetic legs. And they were right to an extent, because day to day I don't walk around on them like some do. But I did walk on them, and I laid a wreath at the cenotaph, and I set that as a goal. And because I thought, you're not telling me what I can and can't do, I will decide that for myself. And I have decided that they're not practical for me on a day-to-day life. My wheelchair is the best way for me, but I still wanted to achieve that little goal with them, and that was just really amazing to do that. So is there a magic thing to it? No, I wish I could tell everybody, this is what to do to get through a difficult situation. I think you have to find your own individual way. Having support around you, if you've got the luxury of that, is key. Maybe if you haven't got many family and friends, there's some fantastic charities out there that will provide that in their absence, and provide people for you to talk to and things like that. Even something like the Samaritans might be as simple as just getting on the phone to them. I was lucky I did have those people I could talk to. And weirdly, that made me talk less, because I just knew it was there if I needed it. And the rest of it, I was quite happy to just get on with myself. More because I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't need as much support. I'd obviously had all this care. I'd needed that 24-hour support from people. So I was pushing to try and get back to a point where I didn't need anybody. And that helped me as well.
Appreciate you sharing that, Rick. Listen, mate, you're a true inspiration, not just for military veterans who suffered injuries or mental injuries through tour, but anyone listens to this podcast. You've not let this adversity hold you back. If anything, you've used it like a shield of armor as a driving force to push forward. The purpose of this podcast is using movement to heal our minds, but it can heal us all body to ensure that we can carry on moving forward. You're right, charities such as Samaritans are great avenues for people who want to talk to people, and I very much promote that if they wish to do that. But the reason I say that you're an inspiration is you didn't let your injuries hold you back. You've always been driven, from carrying the Olympic torch to laying a wreath using prosthetics. You've always tried to keep moving on. See many of your posts doing the canoeing and the out water rafting kind of stuff. And it's like, if people can follow your advice and your guidance, then there's a chance for anybody. If you look now, you're not fear of anything, but you must be really aware about your capability. What do you see yourself doing in 12 months' time based on where you are today?
I'm always keen to push new things. The last sort of 12 months, I've really got into the outdoors again. I want to do a bit of wild camping, and last week I went swimming in a waterfall that I had to kind of crawl the last 50 metres along the floor because it was too rocky for my wheelchair and stuff. Now I've got great mates who will just grab my wheelchair and bring that on things. So to some extent, I need that support doing those things. But I'm just keen to, if I feel that there's something I want to do, then I'll go and find a way to do it, because like there are definitely waterfalls that I couldn't go and swim in without being carried on a stretcher or whatever. So I won't go to those, but there are also lots that will be a little bit of a challenge to push myself, but I can achieve it. And spending time in the outdoors, I think is good always, even if it's just a stroll round the block from your house. But think from the military, I like the peace of being sleeping out there at night and listening to the owls tweeting, or the noises in the evening, just the fresh air. Even away from a phone signal, I think it's important to have some time away from that, because our phones take over our lives these days. With constantly pinging with social media, emails, phone calls and stuff. Even just having that break away. But 12 months time, I think hopefully I'll be a bit more of a seasoned camper and I've got back into it. I've been buying some new kit and trying out things, seeing what works, incorporating getting my wheelchair in the tent with me and things like that. I've been doing some research on like routes up small hills, mountains, because some of them you can sort of drive halfway up and then do the less steep routes and things like that. The important thing for me is that I'm met the most and I'm happy. I'm quite impulsive, so like in 3 weeks' time there might be something else that I think, oh, that's interesting, and I'll just think, let's go and do some research and do that. And I would always encourage anybody to just give things a try. Like I've tried a good few things that I don't like. I've done it, tick that off the box, and on to the next one we go. And then I've found other things that I really enjoy doing, like my football and things like that. And I'll carry on doing them probably for as long as I'm capable. So in 12 months' time, I think I'll just be doing more of the same. I think the outdoors things, I've definitely got a love for that. So that will be a now more common theme. I intend to get away backpacking and hiking and doing bits and pieces quite a bit over the next 12 months. I've done a couple recently. One, because it's better to test the kit in the cold and the wet, as we know. If you can do it then you can definitely do it in the summer, can't you? And things like that. The role I help out with the Manchester United Disabled Supporters Association, so I'll be continuing to do that. That's been really good for me to understand other people's disabilities and the challenges around that. And actually, it makes me feel lucky in mine, because actually I'm capable physically of way more than a lot of people are, and I'm fortunate for that. That helps keep me grounded a bit like those good characters when we first joined the military. Those people in the Disabled Sports Association, make me feel grateful for what I can do rather than focus on what I can't. So just more of the same, mate, really. Just that somebody will probably suggest some sort of charity challenge. I'm training for a 5 kilometre swim in Windermere again this year. You might be aware that I did the 1 mile the year before last. I did 2 miles this year. So we're going to go for 5K, which is just over 3 miles this year. That'll be hard. I found the 2 mile one quite hard. So I've been training. I always like to try and raise a bit of money and awareness for charities, and also it gives me another goal, as I said, another focus, something to push for.
Combat stress and plasma, ones that people associate to the military, might be well averse to, but obviously mind, who deal with mental health issues in Civvy Street. They're all very positive, but also supportive charities out there. A good old colleague of ours does Healthy Heroes charity in the Northwest, who are trying to help people going through challenging times. So if anyone can help the charities that you're associated with, all those mentioned, it would be really appreciated, because it's going to help so many people down the road. And one thing I get with your conversations regarding the Man United Supporters Association and the charity work that you do is you never, ever say no. You're always willing to help others. Is that part and parcel of you wanting to support people like you were supported? And what do you see as being the biggest positive that these charities can do for people?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps me helping people. I think that's part of it. I do get something out of it. I don't need any thanks or any of that, but it makes you feel good to know you kind of helping other people in their challenges and stuff. No, obviously I've been injured to be 16 years now, so I now understand the impact that me doing what I do can have on other people, and it can just be somebody who randomly comes across. So like one of the swims, an able-bodied lady just came over to me and went, "Do you know what, I'm going to go and learn swim now. I've never done it, but if you can do that, the least I can do is go and learn to swim," and it can be as simple as that. And I love that, because I know she will have so many benefits with her health, her fitness, but also enjoying going swimming when she learns. So I love stuff like that. The support I receive from charities makes it important to me that I want that support to exist for people further down the line. So if I can raise a bit of money to kind of help out that's great as well. Yeah, it also allows me to set those challenges and those goals that I mentioned earlier and keep myself busy. I'm really comfortable in my own company. I live alone and stuff, but I also know it can become too comfortable, really. So I need to keep getting myself out, pushing myself and doing enjoyable tasks, challenges, whatever it might be. I'm thankful those charities and things exist, and it's great to be able to kind of help out, whether that be one of the military ones or whether it be the Man U Foundation or a local community one. They all have such a fundamental role. In a perfect world, they wouldn't exist, would they? Because they wouldn't be needed. The support would be there, or the support wouldn't even be needed. But they are needed. They're massively needed, and they play a vital role. Sometimes it can be a piece of kit or equipment that you might need. For me, like a wheelchair or something. Other times, ones like mine, for example, that you mentioned, are there for that emotional support, that support of talking to somebody, and some guidance on what your next steps might look to be and how you can learn some coping mechanisms and things like that. There's charities like Scotty's Little Soldiers who help bereaved children who've lost their parents through the military. There's so many, and they all play their sort of individual roles, and they're absolutely key. And, you know, the impact I've seen firsthand, you know, my life would be a lot more difficult if they weren't around, and I know many others would as well. So it's important that we can support them when we can, and that they keep doing the amazing job that they are.
Completely. And I totally echo what you said about the charities. I think you're right. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need them, but we do, and they do an incredible job supporting directly or indirectly to the people who need it. You know, you mentioned earlier on that you don't let the things of the past impact your future, and that's incredible strength to have. But if you had the opportunity today to share a message to someone who's just joined the military and going through some mental and physical adversity, or someone who's having issues, be it work, personal life, or whatever it may be, that they need some advice, how movement, how talking can help them get the support they need, what would be the message that you would share?
I think there's two key things for me. Talking is huge, whether that be, as we've said, to one of the charities, to your friends, to your family, whoever you feel comfortable to. I think we're all different. I know for me it would be a difficult conversation to have with a family member about how I'm feeling down or whatever, whereas with a stranger I feel like it would be easier for me. It may be the opposite for other people, but it doesn't matter as long as you're going to talk to them, whether it's on the phone or in person or whatever. Just go and open up, tell them, because actually we tend to think we're the only person going through what we're going through, and you start to realise that there's loads of people out there going through similar. Some of those people can give you some fantastic advice on how to get through it better yourself. And then finding your things that you enjoy doing that take your mind away from that stuff. It could be as simple as walking your dog. It could be a hobby. Mine are sort of going to Man United, being involved with the sales supporters, fitness, going to the gym, the outdoor stuff, the peace and quiet of that. At home, I love watching movies and doing a bit of gaming, because those things take my mind away. I'm fully concentrated on the movie or whatever it might be. I find those relaxing. Reading a book, I've got back more into what books I read, but those are mine. They don't have to be yours or whoever it is. You will have your own things that you find and enjoy. And if you haven't, maybe go out and just try some things. Get out your comfort zone. And it doesn't matter if you don't like it, try the next one. Like that in itself will sort of be a thing of trying new stuff that'll keep you occupied. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you sit around in your own head too often, doesn't matter who you are, you know, we catastrophize far too much, and then the negative thoughts step in, and it can be a slippery slope to you end up in that hole. And it's important that we try and keep you out of that and keep the positive thoughts coming in when you can.
Rick, completely agree. And thank you very much for joining me today on this episode. I genuinely appreciate your honesty, and your story is pivotal to the purpose behind this podcast. Conversations like this matter because they remind us that survival is not just the end of the story, it's only part. Also, it matters as much of sharing that story than holding it to yourself. If this episode spoke to you, IG, or simply made you feel less alone, I'd like you to join us to stay connected. You can follow and subscribe to Trauma, Training and Transformation on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can also watch this full episode on YouTube, on James Alder. You can also join me on my weekly Substack, which is at Transformation Through Training, where I share self-help guides to using movement to heal the mind. If you'd like to carry on supporting me to keep these conversations going, you can do so by buying me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. You're not weak for struggling. You're responding to something that is real, and you do not have to do it alone. Reach out, move, and help yourself. Thanks for joining. See you at the next one.